Michael Miller was appointed News Corp Australia's Executive Chairman in November 2015. He has more than 15 years' experience in senior executive roles in the media industry here in Australia, including a stint as the Chief Executive Officer of APN News and Media. Michael has sat on the boards of Fox Sports Australia, carsguide.com.au, the Committee for Sydney and Waratahs Rugby. I think anybody associated with Waratahs are going through a character-forming experience at the moment. They're a bit like the Collingwood of the rugby union world. Apologies to Collingwood fans. He is currently the chairman of Newspaper Works and also a director of REA, Foxtel and Fox Sports. He is here to speak about the challenges facing News Corp, in fact the challenges facing every media organisation, not just in Australia but right around the world, but in particular how News Corp is dealing with the ever-shifting tectonic plates in Australia's media landscape and the challenges and the opportunities he sees for the future. After which Michael has generously agreed to take your questions. So put your thinking caps on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Chairman of News Corp Australia, Michael Miller.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your introduction. I've got to say, after that, I do feel a bit of an outsider in the room. Yes, I've never been a journalist nor an editor. I do live in Sydney. I do have an association of rugby. But when it comes to AFL, I am backing Josh Kennedy for the Brownlow medal. Maybe they are some superficial measures. As I said, I'm not a journalist, but I do love the stories you tell and how you tell them. I've loved media from an early age. And working in this industry has always been an ambition. My first job in media was not in Flinders or Holt Street. Rather, it began in a rather less sophisticated fashion, as a 10-year-old on the streets of a country town in the New South Wales Hunter Valley, delivering the Muswellbrook Chronicle. Post-work, I would meet my colleagues at the local, Milk Bar that is, and play the latest in tech gaming, Pac-Man, share a few post-work soft drinks, and tell a few tall tales of our escapades that day. Yes, even at that early age, I could see there was a lot to like about media. As for this city and your game, I know both well. I spent 4 years living here, worked in the marketing department at the Herald and Whitley Times, and I threw myself into learning the business of AFL. From there, I've been involved with 2 AFL broadcast rights negotiations, and I did chair the AFL Broadcasters Group for 3 years. As a director of Fox Sports for more than 10 years, and now a director of Foxtel, I know how important the game of AFL is for the audience it attracts and the revenues that follow. Obviously, I know it's the lifeblood of the Herald Sun, The Age, Channel 7, SEN, Triple M and 3AW. And while the players and the coaches are revered, so too are the AFL writers and commentators. Robbo, Mick, Caro, Bruce, BT, Jared, Kingy and others are rock stars in their own right and deservedly so. Each of them demonstrate the very best of journalism. They are courageous and they challenge authority, be they player, coach or administrator. They take risks and because of that they are trusted, credible and respected. Not always liked, mind you, but always respected. To work for news, by definition, means a love of journalism is to your core, regardless of whether you're in sales, in marketing, or a senior executive. Our journalists tell tough stories. They investigate truths and campaign for what's right for our communities. I hold the greatest respect for those who put their name and reputation to reporting those stories, and those that have an instinctive knowledge and understanding of what audiences want and how they feel. Journalism is a unique craft and one that we need to treasure. That craft, creating the journalism that connects, engages and matters, is critical to our industry's prosperity and longevity. I'm an optimist. I believe in what we do. But I'm not a Pollyanna. I am a realist. And as an industry, we do have some real challenges. These challenges are well documented and should be well known to you all. The advertising pie is shrinking, and revenues in print and free-to-air are declining and not accelerating in digital. June's SMI numbers show another 10% decline in ad agency expenditure. There are more players than ever competing for this decreasing pie. The cost of entry and operate are lower than ever, enabling startups and pop-up publishers to compete for eyeballs, ears and dollars. Then there are the international streamers, such as Netflix, Amazon Prime and YouTube, who continue to dilute local broadcast audiences. The Daily Mail, the New York Times, The Guardian, and many others are taking a share of the news category. Global digital advertising players such as Facebook and Google dominate the new advertising landscape, accounting for 85% of new digital revenues over the past year. These global broadcasters, publishers and networks challenge us with scale and resources previously unseen in this country, while dwarfing those of the local industry, and also while pushing up our creative and content costs. Then there's the current media legislation, which was established in a world pre the internet and prevents us all from competing on a level playing field. It's a legislation that prohibits Australian media companies achieving the scale needed to meet these challenges. And while we can justifiably blame technology, society's changes, piracy, global players, government and legislation for our current dire state, we must assume some of the blame ourselves. The fact is, less is being invested in Australian content across all mediums, and the challenge of producing great content is harder to meet. We are primarily domestically orientated, focused on our traditional competitive share rather than investing regionally for growth, while at the same time reducing our marketing and promotion of our brands and our talent. And we've also given away our unique journalism for free, not only to consumers, but also to those new competitors. It is a cruel irony that here we are, organisations that invest in journalism and support the creation of unique local content for Australian audiences in the fight of our lives against international players who, despite their scale, lack our local commitment, influence and impact. Today, I want to talk about what these challenges mean for our industry and what we need to do to meet them, to ensure the future of a strong Australian media sector. This is not only what News Corp needs to do and is doing, but what we collectively, as stakeholders in this vital industry, need to do. The News Corp of today is not the company you may think that it is. For many, News Corp is seen as a print monolith. We are much more than that. I'm proud to lead a company that has such depth and breadth of assets. News Corp is Australia's leading publisher of online video, with more than 50 million views a month. We are the #1 lifestyle publisher, with an 8-to-1 lead over our competitors in the food category. We're the largest prestige publisher in the country, with a monthly audience of more than 7 million. Our online news site, news.com.au, is Australia's #1 news brand by a significant distance. Fox Sports delivers more than 10,000 hours of live sport a year. We're a major stakeholder in REA, now part of the world's largest digital property business. All up, 16 million Australians choose to engage with our brands every month, and that's more than Facebook. Yes, and we're also a newspaper publisher, and proudly so. The influence, the journalism and the authority of our printed newspapers is our core franchise. We firmly believe in their future, and it's one of the reasons why we purchased the Australian regional newspaper business late last year. Despite News Corp being a complex media company, we're not immune to the same challenges of all other local players. Those issues are hurting us and will continue to hurt our capacity for growth unless we address them. At News Corp, we have 4 clear priorities. Our first step is a move from a diversified media company to a united media company. We need greater internal cooperation to deliver better outcomes for our customers, our audiences, our staff, and our portfolio of businesses. An example of the benefits of this cooperation is already being seen between The Australian, The Wall Street Journal and Sky News Business. Ticky Fullerton now sits alongside the Wall Street Journal team, ensuring we maximise the quality resources and deliver world-class content. It's also why we created Food Corp, a united network of our food titles such as Delicious, Donna Hay and Taste to deliver a multi-brand solution for our advertisers. Or it's why we created women.com.au, a single destination for news, opinion and lifestyle advice and debate for a female audience. And we're taking the same approach to network our property, sport and travel brands. This internal collaboration creates a more attractive scale proposition for our commercial partners to effectively communicate their messages. Our second priority is our unwavering commitment to create unique, high-value local journalism. Journalism that holds government to account, shines the light on public service incompetence, and campaigns for better health and transport services for our communities. What we do is uniquely local and is not readily replicated or replaced. We expose ministerial travel routes or interrogate the issue of spiralling youth crime gangs on Melbourne streets. When a siege hits this city, we are there, providing the essential information to often a confused and a frightened audience. It's just as we were there 86 years ago for the Good Friday appeal, raising much needed funds for the Royal Children's Hospital. We champion, we challenge, and we care. Providing local news and local voices is essential for a vibrant media and also for an informed community. Our commitment to journalism is also why we acquired and invested in Sky News, a team that provides much-watched analysis, news and commentary on local politics and is on the ground where Australians live, work and play. And it's working. Sky News Live is now the highest now has its highest channel ranking in our history. The weekday prime audience in the first 6 months of this year is 25% higher than the first half of 2016, which was during an election period. Paul Murray Live is now the highest rating Foxtel show in its time slot, and his weekly audience has grown 44% in the past 12 months. Our third priority is growing consumer revenues with a focus on subscriptions. We know that more people are paying for content than ever before. We know that our unique and trusted journalism is what our audiences want, and we know they're willing to pay for it. We believe that quality, unique journalism and opinion should be paid for and should never have been given away. Our numbers reflect that belief. The Australian's consumer revenue from subscriptions is now greater than its advertising revenues. Digital subscriptions are now greater than print subscriptions for that title. Publishers in the US are experiencing a resurgence in newspaper audiences thanks to a Trump bump. People are putting their faith in trusted brands that matter. Brands with authority, expertise and credibility. Revenue for journalism is key to growing our revenues. Our fourth priority is to better compete with the new media players is operating smarter. We need to use the unique data that's available to us. The data we have enables us to publish the most relevant content that best meets our audience and individuals' interests. This leads to journalism we can monetise. With apologies to the editors in the room, while gut instinct once told us all we needed to know, today the insight from data that provide live and accurate measures of what audiences are consuming. Combined, instinct and live data are the new weapons in an editor's arsenal. In Adelaide, for example, 40% of subscriptions from our local messenger sites come from local planning, zoning and development stories. In Brisbane, court reports are one of the top 3 subscription drivers. Here in Melbourne, it's AFL, obviously. And yes, I concede I did not need data analytics to tell me that. The shape and strength of Australia's media future rests in our hands. As an industry, we also need clear priorities as we enter a new era of media opportunity. We do need a unity of purpose. For me, there are 5 clear industry priorities. We need to cooperate as a unified media, support our own local industry, invest more in content and journalism, operate smarter by using data, and speak with one voice about media reform. Allow me to explain. By definition, the media industry is competitive, and that's healthy. The race for a scoop is the adrenaline charge that a newsroom and a news organisation, that drives a newsroom and a news organisation. But here and now, we need cooperation, not competition. Old lines should be redrawn, not just for publishers, but for television and radio. We need to use our industry scale to better meet our revenue and cost challenges, and most of all, better serve Australians. They've done it in New Zealand, where once traditional foes, TVNZ, MediaWorks, NZME and Fairfax Media, have united to create a new local advertising exchange, CAPEX. By putting the customer first, they have given advertisers access to a range of publisher platforms via a single transaction. And as a result, Google and Facebook have not enjoyed the same rate of growth in that country. We also need industry-wide cooperation to actively and publicly support our industry. As I referenced earlier with those AFL writers, we don't have to like each other, but we need to respect each other more. We need to stop revelling in each other's problems and publish less negative articles about rival newsrooms being gutted. No one should be rejoicing in the Channel 9 decision to close its Darwin newsrooms, least of all the publisher of the NT News. We need to be our own champions and change the conversation about the value, the contribution of the media in this country and its communities. This is what sets us apart. It's our differentiator. Our ability to tell unique local stories and cover councils, to report courts, to give a voice to those who are so often without one. We need to operate smarter, to use and make better use of data. The power of data is what's propelling Google and Facebook to our own detriment. And finally, our united voice needs to maintain the pressure in Canberra for media reforms, or I fear that the Darwin community may not be the only one to lose its local radio, TV or newspaper. The government needs to ensure that Australian copyright law is protected. Copyright laws must provide a framework to ensure that journalists, musicians and sporting bodies can continue to create and invest in local content. Let me conclude. These are challenging times for our industry. We face a complexity of issues that pose significant threats for our future. But we will withstand them and grow stronger. News Corp has constantly and successfully adapted to change. Since Rupert Murdoch's first newspaper acquisition, he has been a disruptor. He's made hard choices and driven change. We are a company defined by our ability to do things differently, to take risks. The future of Australian media will be determined by those who work together, work smarter, put their customers first, and to continue to invest in the craft that is the utmost importance to this country, journalism. I am, as I said, an optimist, and I'm confident of a vibrant future ahead. I look forward to us working together to build that bright future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Fantastic speech. Lots of questions coming from it as well. So there'll be a roving microphone or two around the floor. Please raise your hands, state your name and affiliation if you have an affiliation. No statements, please. You can leave that for Twitter. Just questions. And Kate and David are roaming around the floor. So please raise your hand. I'll actually ask you now that you're in Melbourne, Michael, what's the favourite newspaper, your favourite newspaper, the Herald Sun or the Daily Telegraph? You don't have to answer that.
It's an easy answer. I think you know
it. Yes, question down the back here.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. It's Eli Greenblatt from the Australian newspaper. Just a question on the Trump bump that you mentioned. the CEO of the New York Times recently said that he had seen a bump in his subscriptions and his readership since the election of Donald Trump. I'm just wondering if you're seeing that in some of your own publications, and whether or not this kind of political instability we're seeing, shock outcomes in elections here in America and Europe, is that driving people to reach for quality news, and will that actually tip them over to actually pay for quality news, so pay for a subscription service? And if I can sneak in a second question just on Facebook and Google, Nielsen have got a new rating system or a new tracking system that looks at readership and hits on a daily, I think, basis. Are you seeing some new technologies out there or new services that may help better track the readership of sites, non-media sites such as Facebook and Google, that may then help the traditional media players such as The Australian or Fairfax or whoever else it might be? Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, a few questions there. First of all, you talk to the Trump bump. Are we seeing anything similar here? We are seeing our audiences holding up. We see at key times, the US election was one particular time that we saw lift in audience. We don't, as an industry, have an audience challenge. We've got a revenue challenge, and how we monetize that audiences. So generally, I'm seeing that, as in the news category, our local audiences are holding up well, and that. Has that changed since the US election? Not to the extent they've seen in the US. You then asked about subscriptions in the US, and that probably and the New York Times speak very openly about what their experiences have been, so there's a lot of data which they're prepared to share more broadly. But I kind of look more at the interests of the regional papers in the US, which have seen definitely a flip to more of their revenues coming from audience as opposed to advertising. And the interesting observation has been made by the investment community that have seen them de-risk the advertising component of those revenues, and have placed a higher valuation on those businesses that have now got a robust audience and revenue stream coming from subscriptions. Interestingly, it's come from journalism and content, and you're now seeing a number of those regional titles in the US reinvesting and rehiring journalists that previously they let them go. You asked about the Google and Facebook, and while I don't think the new metrics is necessarily the Nielsen daily ratings are going to necessarily change how Google and Facebook, I think that we are now globally in more productive conversations with both those companies around the removal of one-click free, and also developing a subscriptions platform with Facebook, so that those conversations are a few weeks old now, and that we are glad to be at the table having those conversations, which I think are industry solutions, not necessarily News Corp solutions.
We've got a question over here, yeah.
Thank you. Lucy Battersby from the Age newspaper. I was wondering, your call for greater cooperation and back-patting amongst news agencies, does that extend to public broadcasters like the ABC, which gets regularly attacked by News Corp?
I think that you break it down, and there are areas that I think we need to be open to. I don't think anything's off the table in terms of what we can potentially achieve together. I think, as I said, competition is strong, and that the ABC gives as good as it gets.
Yes, Michael Lallo from Fairfax.
G'day. Hi, Michael. Speaking again of media organisations working together, do you believe it would make sense for Sky News to produce a bulletin for Channel 10?
Whether it be Channel 10, Channel 7 or Channel 9. If Sky News has capabilities, and we've seen Sky in the UK produce news bulletins for other broadcasters. So I think that's a model that's shown to have worked elsewhere, and I think Sky should be thinking in that direction, and as has been reported, probably have been, and as I say, not necessarily with Channel 10, but it could be with any other broadcaster.
If Channel 10 came open, and assuming the media reforms got through, would that be something of interest to News Corp?
I think there's a process we're currently running with Channel 10 where there's various reportedly private equity and other potential acquirers of 10. We're not involved in any conversations with Channel 10. So that's not something which we're pursuing today. Our position on media reform and in terms of acquisitions is that it shouldn't be legislated, it should be the ACCC that determine that, and so that we would determine, as when Foxtel made a 15% investment in Channel 10, that the ACCC took a view on that, and they are the best place to take a position on whether that investment would be allowed or not by ourselves and by others.
Yes, over here.
Angus Livingston from AAP. We've seen a lot of media outlets in the US pivot to video. They've sacked a lot of their writers to try and attract high-value advertisers with video rolling ads, even though readers aren't necessarily keen on watching more videos online. How do you balance that, where advertisers want to show more video online, whereas readers don't necessarily want to watch it?
Well, I think that the advertiser ultimately makes the decision of, is it working? And at the moment, the demand there to be advertising on video on news sites is high. And so there must be seeing a response from that. So while consumers find it maybe, as they have with other broadcast mediums, that the advertising interruptions are disruptive and unwanted, if it's working, I think the advertisers will continue to demand it. So it's about meeting the market.
John Trevorrow from Leader Community News, Michael. Just a quick question about the idea of traditional media companies coming together as a single group. Around about perhaps 10 years ago that happened with the Right to Know coalition. But I think my sort of impression was that after 4 or 5 years they retreated to their regular sort of competitive set and separated a little bit. Do you think the environment's different this time round, perhaps for a more united front?
Yeah, I do, and I was probably about 6-8 weeks ago now with other media CEOs in Canberra to show our support for media reform, and I probably turned up thinking that that was one of the things you need to do and tick the box and show your united front, but what I heard in the room was a lot of media companies that are actually hurting, and the discussions you have around what we can do together to ensure if media reform doesn't get through, that those local communities are being served. And so I saw a greater willingness than I expected for media companies to work together, and thus the question about Sky and other broadcasters. There's a lot of consistent content. I think we've all seen the occasions of late when there's been more cameras turn up to press conferences than journalists. That why are there? What can we be doing together and cover more? I think it's a key part of News Corp's decision around our photographers is that there is not about taking less photographs. It's about ensuring there's a pool there of more photography, more photojournalists, and more photographs to choose from through a different model. So, and that really is a shared model with AAP. So I think that there is some movement and probably more momentum around collaboration at an industry level.
Yeah, Chip there at the front. Just while the microphone goes there, you recently, a lot of News Corp photographers have left. Are there more redundancies coming? Every media company, as you say, is struggling. Is that on the books for News Corp? Not just photographers, but journalists as well.
We have no planned announcements around redundancies. I think that we need to be. I think every media company needs to be constantly looking at its, at how we best, use talent. We talk about photojournalists leaving. We're not talking about video editors that are arriving. We've got people who are joining the company at the same time people are leaving, and that our industry has changed, and it's about changing the size and shape better to meet consumer needs. And so there are people entering the company and there are people leaving the company, and that's unfortunately, I think, in every industry, not just in media, is I suppose the rhythm which companies now unfortunately work at.
Chip.
Michael, just a bit of a bowling change if you don't mind. So we're a little under 4 months, we've got an Ashes series, and we don't know whether any Australian cricketers are going to be contracted to bowl a ball or face one. So as the head of a cricket broadcaster and a company that may be a key player in the next round of broadcast rights negotiations, can you tell me how frustrated you are at the impasse, who you blame for it, and also what needs to be done to resolve this dispute?
Yeah, so we are a cricket broadcaster. We're not a domestic, in Australia, cricket broadcaster, which we'd love to be. But unfortunately, the current I suppose sports regime doesn't allow us to do so. So that we're not at the table, as it may seem, on this current dispute between players and Cricket Australia. You asked the question, who do we blame? I think I blame a lack of communication on both sides. I think I think the public typically are not fully understanding. They're hearing a lot from a player view, but not necessarily enough from Cricket Australia. I'm optimistic that you have negotiations between I suppose a group of people who work for the company and the company. And I don't see these negotiations, which are probably more public than other negotiations, being that much different. It does concern me that a key part of our cultural fabric over summer may be disrupted, and that would be a shame. But I'm still hopeful that, even though we're not at the table, that pragmatism and sense will prevail, and that we'll be seeing Australia compete and win the Ashes.
Over here, yep.
Sorry. Just to go back to your roots and my roots in regional journalism, where do you see the future of that? Because journalism in regional Australia has basically been gutted over the past couple of years, and the people of Orange don't really care what's happening to Clover Moor. The people of Brisbane, of the Sunshine Coast, don't care what's happening in Brisbane. Where do you see regional journalism going, or what's the outlook for?
I'm more confident about regional journalism than I am for the other categories, to be honest. I think that when I look at I've recently spent a week looking at a number of our titles in northern New South Wales and in Queensland, and spent a bit of time at the Tweed, and going through the Tweed Daily News. There was none of the other news that they were publishing on a daily basis available elsewhere. And they are enjoying good advertiser support and good national advertiser support and good audience support. The success of those particular regions often are determined on the economic part of the cycle of those communities. But as we've seen in the US, and we've seen Warren Buffett invest in regional newspapers, being that they do have a unique proposition that the Facebooks, the Googles, and even some areas of radio and TV have networked into their markets. So I'm really confident about regional, those regional markets, and there will be some that will shrink based on their population size. I also make the observation regularly that there's very few communities of 5,000 people or more who don't have their own newspaper. Now that paper may just be weekly. It may not necessarily be a multi-page. It may only be 16 pages or less. But they do have a voice, often that's in print, to communicate what's happening in those communities. So, hey, I'm optimistic. I fear that without the ability for them to achieve scale, and particularly when we look at our acquisition of the Australian Regional Newspaper Group from APN, part of the ACCC determination was that there was no other natural buyer. There were some private equity firms that didn't have reportedly position to transact, and since in recent weeks Southern Cross Austereo said that they had interest, but the legislation wouldn't allow them to participate in the process. So that's where I get to in terms of regional media. They need scale, they need the resource, and they need to be able to network, and so that as terms of the bundle that we support of media reform, the reach rule, as well as the 2 out of 3 and other parts of that reform are outdated, and the reach rule is an important part of that.
In fact, just on that, Parliament's back in a couple of weeks, media reform's on the table. Realistically, looking at the Senate, what prospect do you see there is of those two key elements, the 75% reach rule and the 2 out of 3, seeing the light of day and becoming law, or being repealed? Sorry.
It's hard to get a read, to be honest. I think the positions of the minor parties and the independents have been well documented, and it's hard to get a read of whether. I think the Greens have shown some reportedly openness to understand what the current Senate review outcomes are before they land on a position. And One Nation equally, I think, are engaged in understanding more about it. So I don't want to kind of predict which way it will fall, but I think it's in the balance.
And worst case scenario, if it doesn't happen, the media reform dies yet again in Australia. What's News Corp's next step?
Well, we operate within the restrictions that we currently operate in, and we have continue to make investments that we'll work through with the ACCC on, and that we'll continue to look for investments in that give us that scale, but also improve data. While we don't have any plans today for broadcasting, we're fully behind our Foxtel and Fox Sports investments. So it's business as usual, sadly.
There's a question over here, yeah.
That kind of answered my question about how much more scale would a company like News Corp need.
The head table
and also just want to follow up, you talk about collaboration between journalists, but one of our prime motivators is often competition. It's often getting a scoop. It's being able to splash exclusive on your paper. Do you think you'd be taking away a key part of our craft if you did have more collaboration and fewer news organisations?
Yeah. I think lumping them into collaborate, not collaborate is fairly a blunt instrument. I think there are parts of that we should be sharing and wire services on, single camera feed, cover more rather than cover the same event multiple times is where I kind of lean towards in terms of where I see the opportunities in collaboration. I think it's about better serving consumers by pooling more resources. Yep, scoops and exclusives we should pursue, and they're what defines our brands differently. And so I'm not wanting to see that. I'd much prefer spend more time chasing the exclusive story than too much time chasing the same story that we all roll up to cover and cover fairly much in the same manner. So just to put your point on scale, I think one of the challenges we've got politically is the scale of advertising solution, which is where we're competing and we're seeing our revenues being impacted versus scale of audience. And that the ability to provide advertisers with a scale solution as opposed to audiences who will choose their brands and their different channels to what they specify and need at particular moments of their time. It's the scale to achieve advertising outcomes, which is what we are currently lacking. And that is why I think the revenues are leaving the industry and going to those players that provide advertising solutions at scale, which at the moment we're unable to provide.
Yeah, down the back there.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for your presentation. Obviously, as the head of a news organisation, we're trying to get, and I'm coming from the media relations side, trying to get people along, the public, newspapers, journalists, all about uncovering truth, the facts and so forth. How does it sit with you, and how do you manage that when organisations like The Australian make huge errors, for example, like Channel 10 and with the board there, and not just The Australian but other errors as well, and you see corrections, and obviously you corrected that. Is that disappointing for you when that happens, as someone who's trying to bring the public along and trying to get them back into newspapers, and journos are all about facts and truth?
Yeah, and I've got a mantra that if we get it wrong, we've got to correct it. And that I think we're all rushing, not just at news, to get the story out and to get the attention of the reader. And hand on heart, I know that we don't always get it right. And when we get it right, it's how you deal with the problem rather than the problem itself. So I find probably more defamation letters come in about how you try to resolve it rather than the fact that you got it wrong in the first place. So it disappoints when we get things wrong. I think I've worked in radio, I've worked in international markets, and it's not something which is just pertinent to news. I think, unfortunately, we live in an industry where we're rushing and publishing on the run too often, and those mistakes happen. It's how we fix them, and that's really where I come from in terms of we've got to fix them.
Yeah, Michael, Mark Baker from the Press Club. Notwithstanding your comments about the desirability of greater collaboration and cooperation between publishers and news companies, been a lot of attention recently on Fairfax. We had two very high-profile bidders who went away and spent weeks poring over the books, and then both of them walked away. Clearly, this is a very significant development for the media landscape in Australia. What's your feeling about what's happened there and what the future might hold for your principal print competitor, at least?
I don't really have the insight to comment what happened there. I've read in various forms different views of what happened there, but I don't have any other insight beyond what has already been published and commented on. There was interest, and that interest wasn't followed through. That's the summation of it, as I see it, and that what Fairfax have advised the market that they're now pursuing the part divestment of Domain is what they do, rather than what we need to respond to. And so I don't focus as much as maybe what traditionally we had assumed that media companies do in looking across the river at what our local competitors are doing. I think our issue is probably more with what our global competitors are and the impact are doing and the impact they have on us. What will happen with Fairfax? Hey, that's for them to decide. I don't want to. I think what we think they should do is probably not me to tell them how to do their job. So I'll pass on that one.
Any more questions? In fact, just over here, speaking of Fairfax, Greg Hywood has in the past put a deadline, taken the deadline off the future of printed newspapers, talking about all the challenges facing the newspaper model. Do you see a stage in the perhaps not so distant future where there won't be a printed, perhaps weekday edition of the Telegraph, the Herald Sun, the Oz, with a greater focus on digital?
There are very few cities now around the world, and Melbourne and Sydney are big cities, but very few cities that have two morning daily newspapers. So I think that I can see a day where there's maybe just one paper in those two markets. One metropolitan local paper. There'll still be national papers. I think they're reaching a different audience. I think Greg's had to sell his brands of late, so they're robust and got a future. And I think competition is good, and Greg talking up the industry is good for the industry.
Okay. Would there be a situation there where News Corp could make the very difficult choice of pulling printed newspapers?
Well, we're not at that point at the moment, and so it's not something which we've considered.
Yep.
Sue Olsen from 120 Ways Publishing. I'm curious about your point that you raised about people being willing to pay by subscription. How do you see media companies being valued in the future? Will it be the percentage of subscriptions, percentage of advertising, percentage of sales? And can you see that mix changing, or is there some other factor that will determine the value of media companies? So
maybe just to further explain my comment about people being willing to pay. I think there's plenty of research now that shows millennials particularly accepting of paying for content. That's the generation prior that were the pirates that always tried to find a way to download music and books and other forms of media. So I think the technology has caught up in terms of stopping that piracy. But when you consider how much people are now prepared to pay for Netflix, for Stan, for Foxtel Now, equally how they're prepared to pay for an app. The days of downloading the free one and working out that it wasn't very good and then downloading the paid one, I think people now go straight to the paid app. Music, movies, Apple TVs, those devices, is that the time and the quality impact of searching your way around from paying is not worth what you are paying, and you are prepared to pay for content. So we've definitely seen that with Foxtel, a greater consideration set of people who are now prepared to pay for content. So that's a good thing. I think part of that mix is also newspaper subscriptions, that if you want unique quality content, that you pay for your newspaper. And so providing a paywall and paying and ensuring that that works and that captures the subscriber at the right price is critical for us moving forward. You had a second part of the question, sorry, which percentage. How will we be rated? Different analysts will have different models, and I think that they will look for a blend. I think when it comes to more specialist media, we'll see a greater proportion of what I would call consumer revenue, And consumer revenue will come from the seminars, the events, the subscription, the retail sale. There are other high engagement entertainment. And so I think some investors want to see diversified revenue streams, not just one revenue stream. But they'll look at the risk associated with each of those revenue streams. And if you have unique content that isn't being replicated, then they'll put a higher value on that unique content.
Got time for a couple more questions casting around the room as the microphone wends its way there. You're talking about industry collaboration and competition. Who's the competitor you most respect in Australia, other than the ABC?
Oh, you got me there. I think that there's probably not one particular. I think when it comes to sports broadcast, I think Channel 7 have shown historically that they rise for that occasion. In terms of local coverage, I spent some years at with APN, and I suppose really respect their position in terms of local news and being their mantra. In terms of radio, I do have a high respect for those who work in radio, getting up early in the morning to work 3 hours live radio every day. In some cases,
and TV.
But for decades, in some cases, and still be number one. I've got to say, I spent some time with some FM brands, and those who go to the edge are the ones that succeed. Those who self-filter too much are the ones that come second and third. There's different reasons for. I think those that are more leaning towards opinion today, I do respect for being able to without fear put their views publicly, and I think that Sky News is doing more of that. I think that those who succeed in radio are doing more of that. There's different examples that I draw upon in terms of respect. But we've got a very strong media industry. We've got historically been one of the better performers. Our magazine penetration has been world class. The Herald Sun is still the highest, I suppose, has the highest readership of any competitive newspaper market in the world. We are a media country, and that we have very good media. Unfortunately, there's a lot of us, and there's more international players that have come in, and our traditional revenue stream of advertising has got smaller.
Yes, question up here.
This just goes to the question of investing in quality journalism, and we've got to maintain that to keep audiences. But we have, over the past decade or so, been reducing the number of sub-editors and that production side of things. Have we come to the tipping point there? Are we done? Or do you think we're evolving still? Or do you have faith in our ability to produce error-free, as much as possible, journalism?
To answer your question, we're never done. I think that, sadly, I think there's technology changes. I think there are societal shifts that we need to be always working smarter at. So I don't think we're never, ever done in terms of what we can do to improve. So I think that in our case, we weren't necessarily using the technology as well as what other markets were. And so what we've tried to achieve through some of our structural changes is protect the journalism and look at other areas that we can collaborate internally better together around production areas, and photography being another one of those. And I see subbing as being another area where we can work with maybe others outside the company to produce as good as, if not better, newspapers at a far better cost base that allows us to invest and be committed to journalism.
One more point on that goes to training. Do you think we're investing enough in training journalists? Because we've just put on at AAP 7 cadets and 6 news interns, and a lot of those were refugees from what would have once upon a time been regional newspapers, and they've come to us for training. Do you think there's enough training being done within the industry itself?
It's a two-edged sword, that one. The first part of the answer is we could always do more training. I think the best training is on the job, and that I think we all have a culture within our organisations of mentoring and developing future talent, and that I don't think that has changed. I think that if anything, they're also bringing skills and reverse mentoring to our organisations. So that's something which I think we all have a duty of future to be focused on, is being, bringing on, I suppose, new skills and new talent. And I wouldn't just say it's about being young and cadets. I think that some of the best bloggers and social media users are those who have been in the industry for decades, who have adapted new skills and brought their brand and writing abilities to new platforms and new audiences. So it's an area that we always need to think of how we can do better.
And we might make this the last question. Yep, over to you.
You mentioned about industry collaboration, but you always see a lot of journalists like grumbling about the Daily Mail stealing their stories and their content. And do you see that as an area, like, how's the outcome going to be? Is that going to be a compromised outcome, or how are you going to? How can you see that moving forward? Is that going to be something that ends up in media law courts, or how can you see a solution moving forward with that?
Yeah, I suppose the first aspect of collaboration is that it would need to be born out of shared values, and that if you aren't able to align on what the purpose, the intent of journalism is, then that's going to be hard to collaborate on. I think in the main, and there are exceptions. I think that the industry does have shared values of community, of scoops, of great journalism, and while we maybe don't publicly say so, begrudgingly and privately, we probably admire each other for those successes. I think when it comes to piracy, whether it be of a boxing event on Foxtel, or whether it be from the newspapers of News Corp or Fairfax, to be honest, there's no place for that, and that I don't think there is being done enough. There isn't enough being done to protect copyright, and it's not just the Daily Mail, but there is other digital players that are lifting content and thinking they're smart enough to get around it, and we should call them out, as we do ever so regularly, and go through, pursue, and we spent considerable dollars pursuing those cases legally, and call them out. So we shouldn't stop doing that.